Before we jump into today's episode, if you enjoy the stories we tell here on Murder in the Black, take a second just to hit that follow button on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. It really helps more people discover the show. And if you haven't already, leaving us a 5-star rating and review is one of the best ways to support the podcast. It takes less than a minute, but it makes a huge difference. If you're looking for even more true crime content between episodes, follow Murder in the Black on all social media platforms. And if you want behind the scenes content, episode updates, and a little more of my day to day, you can follow me on Instagram at StephHer_. All right, y'all, let's get into today's case. Today on Murder in the Black, we're talking about Jesse Leroy Matthew Jr. This case is not just about what happened after Hannah Graham disappeared in 2014 or what happened to Morgan Harrington in 2009. It's about the years before that, the warnings, the allegations, the moments where schools, police, and systems all had pieces of the picture, but nobody connected them in time. If you watched my Brittany Norwood episode, this case brought up a similar frustration for me. Different case, different facts, but the same feeling of there were opportunities here. There were chances for someone to document more, escalate sooner, or take a pattern seriously before another woman was harmed. So as we go through this episode, listen for the handoffs. A school handles something internally, a student leaves, another school takes him in, police investigate, but charges don't come. DNA sits in a database without a name attached to it. And all the while, Jesse Matthew keeps moving through spaces where young women are supposed to be safe. By the time the public knew his name, it was already too late for more than one family. Jesse Matthew grew up in Virginia. People who knew him described him as popular, athletic, social. He played football, and by most accounts, he was the kind of guy people noticed. He was big, he was friendly enough, he could blend into a room, especially in places where being charming and athletic can get you more benefit of the doubt than it should. According to source material on Matthew's background, his mother was involved in church and wanted to keep him away from trouble. She reportedly moved the family farther out, away from Charlottesville, Virginia, into a more rural area because she did not want him getting caught up in the wrong crowd. And that detail stands out because it shows there were people in his life trying to put structure around him early on. Church, sports, distance from certain influences, a quieter setting. Those are the kinds of things families often do when they're trying to give somebody a better path. But structure only works if the person inside of it chooses to respect it. So I don't want to overfocus on his childhood like it explains what he did. It doesn't. But it does help set up one of the bigger points in this case. People can have family, support, structure, opportunity, and still choose harm. And when warning signs start showing up later, institutions cannot hide behind the version of him they wanted to believe in. Families can try, parents can move neighborhoods, change schools, put their children in church, put them in sports, surround them with structure, but at some point, a person becomes responsible for the choices they make. And Jesse Matthews' story is full of other people trying to explain him, excuse him, or move him along, while the women who encounter him were left with the consequences. After high school, Matthew attended Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. He played football there, and on paper, it looked like he had a path forward. College, sports, a campus community, a chance to build something. But while he was at Liberty, a young woman reported that she had been sexually assaulted by Jesse. Matthew was identified in public reporting as the alleged perpetrator. He said the encounter was consensual. No criminal charges came from that allegation, but he was asked to leave the school. Now, this is where we have to be careful and honest. When an allegation does not lead to charges, that does not automatically mean nothing happened. It also doesn't mean prosecutors had enough evidence to prove a case in court. Both things can be true. There are a lot of reasons a case might not move forward. The person reporting may not feel safe continuing. There may have been limited physical evidence, and there may be alcohol involved, which defense attorneys often use to muddy the waters. Campus police may not document things properly. A university may prioritize reputation over accountability. The alleged victim may not want to relive everything in court, or the school may decide the easiest solution is not a criminal process, but making the accused student leave. That sometimes is the issue. Because leave campus can sound like accountability when you are inside the university bubble. It can sound like the school did something. He's gone. The complainant does not have to see him in class. The team does not have to answer questions. The administration can close a file. But outside that bubble, he is just somewhere else. He can apply to another school. He can join another team. He can meet another group of students who don't know anything about the prior allegation. He can start over with the same personality, same size, confidence, and the same ability to benefit from people assuming he's harmless. That's why we asked him to leave cannot be the end of a serious sexual assault allegation. It may be one step, but it cannot be the whole system. Because if the response is just, he's gone from our campus now, then the school may feel like the problem is solved, but the community is not safer. The next campus is not warned. The next group of students has no idea. The burden just gets moved. That is one of the main themes of this episode. Colleges are very good at tracking grades, scholarships, athletic performance, eligibility, unpaid fees, parking tickets, and so on and so forth. You catch my drift. But when there are serious allegations involving sexual violence, especially when a student leaves before the process is finished, there has to be a better way to make sure that history doesn't just disappear. And I know that raises complicated questions. Privacy is one of them. Due process. False accusations, of course, do happen, even if they are not the norm. But there has to be a middle ground between convicted in court and nobody at the next school knows anything. Now, I feel very passionate about that because I think this resurfaces time and time again in several cases that I've talked about here on Murder in the Black. And the trending pattern is that there is no process inside the collegiate system that I'm aware of that prioritizes making people aware of serious allegations. One could be sexual assault. That's the one we're talking about today. But in Brittany Norwood's case, it was one of her stealing perpetually at 2 universities, and no one ever knew about it. Now, granted, a lot of people feel like stealing fails in comparison to sexual assault. And yeah, it does. But when you see what ultimately happened to Brittany Norwood, there were signs, right? And so to see how sophisticated we are in society when it comes to a wide range of topics, and to know that there's just this missing piece that's here and that we will continue to see throughout this case, it's very troublesome. Now, after leaving Liberty, Matthew decided to go to Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Virginia. He made the football team there too. Again, he was in a structured campus environment. He had access to student life, parties, classmates, and the social protection that can come with being an athlete. And again, there was another allegation of sexual assault. Public reporting says police investigated the allegation, but no criminal case was brought. Matthew left the school too. So by this point, we're talking about 2 colleges, 2 sexual assault allegations, and no criminal conviction. And from an institutional standpoint, every place could point to its own little box and say, we handled what was in front of us and washed their hands clean of the problem. But when you step back, it looks different because we see a clear pattern. And that's the part that makes me think about women on college campuses. Because when you're a young woman in school, you're told to be careful constantly. Watch what you drink, stay with your friends, don't walk alone, text when you get home, share your location. Hold your keys between your fingers. Do the little things that you're supposed to do to keep you safe. And yes, those safety habits are important. I'm never going to tell women not to take those precautions because we live in a real world. But it cannot only be on women to protect themselves from men that institutions had warnings about. At some point, the school has to be a part of the safety conversation. Athletic departments have to be a part of it. Campus police, local police departments have to communicate with one another. And if a student leaves during or right after a serious allegation, that should not become a clean slate just because a transcript got forwarded. After Christopher Newport, Matthew eventually ended up in Northern Virginia. In September of 2005 in Fairfax City, a woman was attacked. She survived and she was able to help police create a composite sketch, and investigators also recovered DNA from under her fingernails. That detail is important because she fought her attacker off. Now, she was able to give investigators something concrete, not just a memory of a face and not just a description, but biological evidence. In a lot of cases, that's the thing families pray exists because DNA can cut through excuses. It can connect a person to a crime scene when they deny being there. It can link cases that otherwise look separate. The victim of this sexual assault was not from the US. And so while she was able to give a plethora of information to police, she was not able to stay in the US and went back to her place of origin. That DNA profile was entered, but there was no match in the system at the time. And that's one of the moments where you can feel how close law enforcement was and how far away they still really were. They had DNA, they had the survivor and a sketch. They had the kind of evidence that solves cases if the right person is already in the database. But Jesse Matthews' DNA was not there. So the case stayed unsolved and he remained free. By 2007, Matthew was back in the Charlottesville area. He worked as a cab driver, another detail that's important because cab drivers at the time was not just somebody with a job, although it could be viewed as such. A cab driver is someone people generally trust in vulnerable moments. People call cabs when they're tired, intoxicated, lost, separated from friends, or trying to get home. A cab can be safety, especially for women. But when the wrong person is behind the wheel, that same safety plan can become another danger. And that's something I want us to sit with for a second because, as I said previously, women are always told to make the safer choice. Don't walk, don't hitchhike, don't get into a stranger's car, call a cab, call a Uber, get a ride, let somebody else drive. But if the person driving is dangerous, the safety advice becomes obsolete, which is one of the reasons why I was excited when Uber announced their women driver, so more women can feel safer about getting into these Uber cars. Once again, we're faced with the same problem from what I said originally. If the systems don't hold space for accountability, the advice and the safety precautions now become something that we can't trust. And they don't really truly matter because we're always placed in a situation where our vulnerabilities can be exploited. And when someone has a history that suggests a risk to women, like Jesse Matthews, that history should not be invisible just because the person is now wearing a work shirt or driving a marked vehicle. Now we move to Morgan Harrington. Morgan was 20 years old, a Virginia Tech student, and the kind of person whose life had a lot of movement in it. She was connected to music, friends, school, and the normal uncertainty of figuring out who you were in your 20s. She had grown up in Virginia. Even the night she disappeared says something about her personality. She was going to a Metallica concert with friends. This was not a quiet night tucked away somewhere. This was loud music, crowds, energy, and a plan to have a good time. On October 17, 2009, Morgan went to Charlottesville with friends to attend the Metallica concert at John Paul Jones Arena on the University of Virginia's campus. This was supposed to be a regular night out, a concert, friends, music, a drive home later. Nothing about that night was supposed to become a missing persons case, and it never does, right? At some point during the concert, Morgan left the arena. Some accounts say she had fallen earlier that night and may have hit her head. Her friends later said she seemed impaired or disoriented when she stepped out of the concert. At first, people thought she may have been drunk because they were drinking, but her family and friends later said that there was a possibility because she fell earlier in the evening and hit her head that maybe she had a head injury, concussion. And a lot of people believe that that person is drunk and they just assume that she'll figure it out. Sometimes that person could be injured, scared, or something else is wrong. Either way, they're vulnerable. And vulnerability in public is still vulnerability. Being outside a concert venue does not mean you're protected. Being near security doesn't mean somebody is responsible for you. And being surrounded by people does not mean anyone is truly paying attention. That is something women understand too well. A place can be overcrowded and still feel unsafe. You can be visible and still alone. Morgan ended up outside the arena because of the no reentry policy. She was not allowed back in. She called her friends and told them she was outside and she would just find her own way home. That is a terrifying point in the timeline because from the outside looking in, you can see all the danger gathering around her. She is separated from her group. She's outside a crowded venue. It's nighttime. She may be disoriented. She does not have a simple way back inside, and she's trying to figure out how to get home. Now, let me ask y'all this. How many times have women been told, just get a cab? Just get a ride. That's the more responsible thing to do. Make it home without anyone stopping to ask whether the person offering the ride is safe. That's not blaming Morgan. Of course not. Or her friends. That's pointing out the trap. Women are told to use these safety strategies, but those strategies still depend on the people around us not being predators. The next day, October 18th, Morgan's parents learned that her purse had been found outside near the arena area. Her mother, Gil Harrington, knew something was wrong. She said women don't just leave their purses behind. A purse is ID, phone, keys, cards, everything that you could possibly need. And Morgan did not come home. Her family reported her missing immediately and the search began. The Harrington family did not sit quietly and wait. They appealed to the media. They used the internet. Gil Harrington started writing publicly about the search for Morgan. The family created a website and blog posts. They pushed Morgan's name into the public because they understood something families of missing people learn quickly. Attention is a resource. When someone is missing, families live in a state that is hard to explain, but we've talked about often on Murder in the Black. They don't get grief in a straight line. They get panic, hope, rumors, sightings that may be nothing or something. They get phone calls that raise their heart rate. They get silence that feels cruel. And for 101 days, Morgan's family was in that space. On January 26, 2010, a farmer on Anchorage Farm in Albemarle County found what he first believed might have been animal remains. They weren't animal remains. They were human. Morgan had been found. Her family later talked about the strange and painful relief of that. Relief is not happiness. Relief is not peace. But when someone has been missing, being found means the family can stop searching fields, stop chasing every rumor, stop wondering if their loved one is somewhere waiting for help. Morgan's death was ruled a homicide. Investigators kept working. Morgan's shirt was found. Forensic testing connected evidence from Morgan's case to the 2005 Fairfax City rape. That meant the person who attacked the Fairfax survivor was connected to Morgan. But again, there was no name. The DNA linked cases together, but it did not yet identify the man. So the public had a sketch. Police had DNA, the Harrington family had a campaign, and somewhere in or around Charlottesville, the man responsible was still living his life. Gil Harrington later started Help Save the Next Girl, a campaign focused on safety, awareness, and preventing violence against young women. And that name tells you exactly where her mind was. Help save the next girl. Because she had been told the person who killed Morgan might be found through evidence connected to another woman. And as a mother, she did not want there to be another woman. That is such a painful thing to sit with. A family should not have to hope that the next victim creates the evidence that solves their daughter's case. But for years, that is where things stood. Jesse Matthew was not publicly known as a suspect in Morgan's death. He remained in the Charlottesville area. He worked as a cab driver and moved through the same region where UVA students and Virginia Tech students, young women, and nightlife all overlapped. And then came September 2014. Hannah Graham was 18 years old and a second-year student at the University of Virginia. In the early morning hours of September 13th, 2014, she was out with friends in Charlottesville. Hannah had been drinking that night. She had been to parties and bars, and at some point, she became separated from her friends. Her texts show she was confused about where she was. Around 1:20 in the morning, she texted that she was lost. That is one of those details that make your stomach drop because it's so normal and so dangerous at the same time. A college student out late, trying to get to where she's going, looking at streets that may all start to look the same, trying to communicate with friends while her phone still has battery. And this is where the cameras start telling the story. Imagine downtown Charlottesville in those early morning hours. Bars are still active, people are spilling in and out. Some are walking with friends, some are trying to find rides, and some are trying to get to the next place. In the middle of that, Hannah is moving through the area alone. On camera, she does not look like someone with a clear plan. She's walking, sometimes moving quickly, turning through different streets, trying to figure out where she is. Confusion creates an opening. A person who is lost can be easier for the wrong person to approach. Jesse Matthew was also out that night. According to the reporting, he was bar hopping, and bartenders remembered him. They described him as aggressive with women. Some women complained about his behavior. He later said he was out trying to pick up women. So picture both of those things happening. Same night, same time. Hannah is separated from her friends, turned around, trying to make sense of where she is. Matthew is moving through the same nightlife area, approaching women, being remembered by bartenders for how he acted. Then the paths cross. The footage and witness accounts show Matthew noticing Hannah. He does not just appear once and disappear. He stays near her. He follows the movement of the night. He inserts himself into the confusion. At one point, witnesses saw him with his arm around her. A small detail, but heavy. Because an arm around somebody can look protective if the person is safe. It can look casual if the person is a friend, but it can also be control. Steering can be a moment someone starts guiding vulnerable people away from everyone else. And the people who saw them did not all think it looked right. One witness said Hannah appeared drunk. Another said Matthew did not look friendly. That kind of footage is hard to watch because you know what the people in the moment did not know. When you watch it later, every second feels like a warning. Every corner she turns feels important. Every time he appears near her, you want somebody to stop everything from moving forward. But real life does not come with music that tells you danger is coming. People are walking around, bars are closing, friends are texting. Everybody is in their own little world. And predators use that. They do not need a dark alley if they can hide in plain sight. Matthew did not need to drag Hannah out of the room in front of everybody. He inserted himself into the confusion that was already there. That's why the footage was so important. It showed proximity, It showed timing, and it showed the last known stretch of her life before she disappeared. There were people who noticed. A lot of women know that feeling. You're out. You see another woman with a man, and something about the body language just feels off. Maybe she looks too impaired. He's steering her. She's not matching his energy. Maybe you cannot explain it exactly, but your gut tells you this isn't right. Some witnesses did speak up when they saw this interaction. There were people who confronted or questioned the situation, but Matthew still ended up leaving with Hannah. They went into a bar, Tempo, and when they came out, they walked away together. That would be one of the last times Hannah was seen alive. And this is one of the hardest pieces for me because people did notice. This was not a case where nobody saw anything. There were witnesses who felt something was off, but noticing danger and interrupting danger are two different things. And I do not say that to shame the witnesses. I think the witnesses who were bold enough to say something, to say, hey, what's going on here? You good? I applaud them because most people would have just kept minding their own business. But nobody really understood the danger at the time. And we rationalize that danger, right? Nobody wants to misread a situation that's consensual. Nobody wants to get into a confrontation if they're not sure. But I think cases like this teach us a small interruption can matter. I'll give you guys an example that truly does fail in comparison to what we're talking about, but is relevant nonetheless. I was going into Walmart one day. I was on the phone with my husband, and I passed by and I saw a car door open. It was the back seat. And I saw a toddler in their seat. Now, y'all know I live in Texas, so it's hot. And something in me said, I didn't see an adult. I didn't see anybody up front. And so at first I walked and I said on the phone, I said, man, I think that toddler is in the car by themselves. And far be it from me to keep walking. And it's over 100 degrees in that car. And so I did what I felt was right. I turned back around. I walked back to the car. And when I walked back to the car, I saw the mother, and she happened to be on the other side of the door, and I couldn't see her because she might have been bit down or something, but she was inside of the car in the front seat, and the baby was still secured in the back seat. And I felt okay to keep walking and going into the store because I saw an adult in the car with the toddler. But that's a situation where if you see something's off, if you just feel like, I don't know, you know what I mean? But I would hate to have kept walking and not saw anybody. And maybe that child was in the car by themselves. An opportunity to speak up and to go and check nevertheless, right? But I think in this case, I think asking questions like, do you know him? Do you want me to call your friend? Getting a bartender to come out and check, following them inside and getting the bartender to check on them because you think something there isn't right. Getting security, standing there long enough to make the situation inconvenient for the man who's trying to isolate her. Predators rely on everyone else being polite. They're trusting that you're not going to say something, that you're going to mind your own business. And sometimes safety requires being a little inconvenient. Hannah never made it home. The search for Hannah started quickly. Her disappearance got major attention, especially because she was a UVA student and there was surveillance footage showing her final known moments. Police began releasing images and asking the public for help. And as footage circulated, the man seen with Hannah became a person of interest. That man was Jesse Matthew. Police went to his home. They searched his apartment and his vehicle. They obtained clothing, including shorts believed to match what he had been wearing in the surveillance footage. But they still needed the lab work. They needed evidence. They needed to build the case in a way that would hold. When police spoke with Matthew, he of course denied involvement. He did not provide DNA voluntarily. And then he disappeared. At first, the public did not know that Hannah's case was connected to Morgan Harrington's case. The known link at the time was solely between Morgan and the 2005 Fairfax attack. Hannah was a separate missing person case with a person of interest. But once Jesse Matthew's name and face started circulating, something happened. People started looking at the old composite sketch from the Fairfax case. People who knew Matthew or had seen him began noticing similarities. The Harrington family saw the resemblance too. Morgan's father took the sketch and Matthew's photo to the police because he believed this could be the man. And the forensic picture began to come together. On September 24, 2014, Matthew was arrested in Galveston County, Texas. On September 24th, 2014, Matthew was arrested in Galveston, Texas. He had made it all the way from Virginia to Texas. A woman recognized him on a beach after seeing media coverage and contacted the police. He was taken into custody. At the time, he was wanted in connection with Hannah Graham's disappearance. He had already been charged with abduction with intent to defile. Later, after Hannah's remains were found, the charges escalated. In February of 2015, he was indicted for first-degree murder in Hannah's death, and prosecutors later pursued capital murder. Hannah's remains were found on October 18, 2014, in southern Albemarle County about 5 weeks after she disappeared. The location was not far from where Morgan Harrington had been found years earlier. Now, the case was no longer just one missing student. It was a much larger question. Who was Jesse Matthew? And how had he been able to remain free for so long? The DNA evidence became the answer in the indictment of the system. Matthew's DNA matched the 2005 Fairfax attack. Forensic evidence linked him to Morgan Harrington. Hannah's DNA was found in places connected to him, including evidence associated with his shorts and vehicle, according to reports about the case. At that point, he could not just explain it away as coincidence. And I want to go back through the chain for a second, because this is where the missed opportunities become hard to ignore. There was a sexual assault allegation at Liberty. Then there was another allegation at Christopher Newport. Then there was a 2005 Fairfax attack with DNA recovered. Then Morgan Harrington disappeared in 2009. In 2010, Matthew was reportedly arrested for a misdemeanor trespass. But under the law at the time, they did not require a DNA sample. If his DNA had been collected then, advocates believe it could have matched the Fairfax profile and linked him to Morgan's case years before Hannah disappeared. But then, and sadly, Hannah disappeared in 2014. That is not one mischance. That's a series of doors that kept opening. And this is where I want the college piece to be taken seriously, because college campuses are their own little worlds. They have their own police departments, conduct boards, athletic departments, and political concerns, donors, and reputations to protect. When a sexual assault allegation comes in, especially involving an athlete, there can be pressure from every direction. The school may not want the bad press, the team may not want to lose a player, friends may choose sides. The survivor may be asked questions they feel more like an interrogation than support. And if the accused student leaves, the campus may breathe a sigh of relief because the immediate tension is gone. But women do not live in administrative convenience. If a man poses a danger, moving him from one campus to another does not reduce the danger. It redistributes it. That's the part I believe needs a real policy conversation, not gossip or public rumor list, not destroying someone's life over unproven claims. I'm talking about formal systems that preserve records, track unresolved serious allegations, and make sure that when a student transfers after a sexual violence complaint, the receiving institution has a lawful way to evaluate risk. Because if colleges can enforce codes of conduct for alcohol, curfews, housing, plagiarism, athletic eligibility, and tuition balances, they can figure out a serious process for sexual violence. It may not be simple, but not simple is not the same thing as impossible. And that's why this case feels so familiar in theme to other cases where institutions had pieces of information, but nobody built the full picture in time. Let me ask you this. If a student is accused of sexual assault at one college, leaves, and then another college gets a similar allegation, should there be a confidential way for campuses to flag that pattern before the next student is put at risk? I'm not talking about publicly branding someone without a conviction. I'm talking about systems, documentation, paperwork, required information. Athletic departments not being allowed to quietly absorb talented players with unresolved serious allegations. Campus police having a duty to coordinate with local law enforcement, a way to prevent a serious allegation from vanishing just because a student transferred. Because universities already know how to share information when they want to. They share transcripts, verify eligibility, track discipline when it affects the school. They protect themselves with paperwork. So why is the safety of women so often left to whispers? Jesse Matthew eventually faced consequences, but not before Morgan and Hannah were gone. In the Fairfax case, he entered an Alford plea in 2015. An Alford plea means a defendant does not admit to guilt in the ordinary way, but acknowledge that prosecutors have enough evidence that a conviction is likely. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 life terms in that case. It came before the guilty pleas in Morgan and Hannah's murders. The Fairfax survivor lived long enough to testify through evidence. Her case helped identify pattern. Her DNA evidence became part of the reason the larger picture finally came into focus. And again, that's why DNA collection policy became such a major issue after this case. If the profile is there, but the person is not in the system, the evidence can only wait. It cannot speak a name until there is something to compare it to. Then on March 2nd, 2016, Matthew pled guilty to the murders of Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington. He received 4 additional consecutive life sentences. That means 7 life sentences total when you include the Fairfax case. And under the plea agreement, he gave up appeal rights and would not be eligible for geriatric release. In plain language, Jesse Matthew is never supposed to be released. The guilty plea also meant the families were spared a full trial. We know that trials can be brutal. They can force families to hear every detail, watch every exhibit, and sit across from the person responsible while the defense picks through the victim's final hours. A plea does not make the pain lighter, but it can prevent the courtroom from becoming another place where families are made to bleed publicly. Still, a plea can leave unanswered questions. It can close the legal case without giving every detail of what happened. In cases like this, families often have to live with 2 truths, a conviction, and they still do not have every answer. But a sentence at the end does not erase the failures before it. I do want to give more context to what happened to Morgan because we somewhat know what happened to Hannah. They were viciously and savagely killed. Morgan decided after learning that she could not gain entrance back into the concert, decided to get a ride home. And we know whose car she ended up getting into. It was Jason Matthews. And as she was in the cab, she realized she didn't have enough money to get her to her destination. So she tells him, hey, I don't have enough money to pay for you, but like I'm good for it. I can get the money for you. And he began to barter with her and say, well, if you just pay me in sex, then the ride's free. You don't have to worry about any money. And of course, she was offended. And once the cab got to a stopping place, she got out of the car. And I don't know at what point she left her purse or her purse was left, but he chased her out of the car and put her back into the car and beat her after he raped her viciously. The same thing was done to Hannah. Jesse Matthews was a savage monster who killed two women. I feel like we're at the part in the conversation because this episode, if you haven't realized, doesn't typically read like the Murder in the Black episode I do for you guys weekly. This is a conversation that I want to have with you. And this may get a little uncomfortable, and maybe some of you are probably saying, Steph, we heard it all before, Sunshine Anderson. But listen, I think as long as we have these problems that are pervasive in our society, then we got to keep having these conversations, right? Because when a man is charming, athletic, socially connected, or useful to an institution, people often hesitate to see him as dangerous. They see the version of him they like. They see the teammate, the employee, the guy from church, the cab driver, the person who smiles, jokes, and blends in. But we know that danger doesn't always show up in the form of an isolated stranger hiding in the dark, in the alleyway. Almost all the time, it's the person in the bar. They're on the football team. They're driving the cab. Sometimes everybody knows them, but nobody knows everything. And for women, that reality changes how we move. It's why we share locations, why we call each other on the way home, why we pretend to be on the phone when we're walking down the street by ourselves. It's why we ask bartenders for help. It's why we catch our friends and watch them and watch strangers too. It may sound repetitive. I know. Women need safety measures, but I don't think it's repetitive when the danger just keeps on repeating. If you're out with your friends, have the ride plan before the night gets messy. Make sure everyone knows who's getting home with who. If somebody gets separated, don't assume they're fine just because they texted. If a friend says she's lost, treat that like a priority. If you see a woman being led away and something just don't feel right, get staff, create a delay, ask directly if he knows her, if you're bold like me. And for venues, bars, campuses, safety cannot just be a poster in the bathroom. It has to be training. It has to be cameras that work. It has to be re-entry policies that consider the vulnerability. Staff who understand that a disoriented young woman outside a venue is not just an inconvenience. She's someone who may need help. Morgan was outside an arena and couldn't get back in. Hannah was lost downtown and separated from her friends. Both of them were in public places before they disappeared. That should bother us. Not because public places can ever be perfectly safe, but because there were people, policies, cameras, bars, campuses, rides, and systems all around them, and still a predator found room to operate. Now here's the most eerie part, and probably the most devastating about these cases. After Matthew's convictions, investigators and the public questioned whether he could be connected to other unsolved disappearances or deaths in Virginia. That's common in cases like this, especially when someone is linked to multiple attacks over many years. But it's important not to turn suspicion into fact. There were other missing women in regions and time frames that made people wonder. Some names have been raised in media discussions and online spaces, but unless law enforcement confirms a connection, we have to be careful, of course. Families of missing women already live with enough uncertainty. They do not need their loved ones turned into theories without evidence. So for this episode, I'm not going to sit here and pin every unsolved case in Virginia on Jesse Matthew. That wouldn't be fair. And I try to be fair and responsible. But I don't think it's fair to say that his confirmed crimes forced investigators to look backward. When someone has a proven history across years and locations, it would be careless not to review other cases for possible overlap. That review is not about creating a monster story. It's about making sure no case gets left behind because nobody wanted to reopen an uncomfortable question. What we can say is this. Once a person is connected to a 2005 sexual assault, a 2009 murder, and a 2014 murder, it's reasonable for investigators to look backward and ask whether there are other cases that need another look too. That's not sensationalism, that's responsible police work. And it's also another reason early accountability matters. If the first allegation had resulted in a stronger action, if the 2005 DNA had hit sooner, if a misdemeanor arrest had required DNA collection, if any part of the pattern had been connected earlier, there may have been a different timeline. Gil Harrington turned her grief into advocacy. She pushed for changes in DNA laws and safety protocols because she believed that if stronger systems had been in place earlier, Morgan and Hannah, and maybe some of those women that may be connected to Jason Matthews, might have been spared. That is what makes her advocacy so important. It's another thing to take that pain into legislative offices, public events, campus safety conversations, and say, change the process. That's exhausting work. It's also how cases move from tragedy to prevention, and that's ultimately what we all want. And prevention does not always look so dramatic. Sometimes it's a database rule. It's a DNA collection requirement. Sometimes it's a campus policy that keeps a serious allegation from getting buried. A venue training security on what to do when a young woman is locked out, impaired, injured, or separated from friends. Those things may sound boring compared to the headline, but that is where safety lives. Safety lives in the policy nobody notices until it saves someone. The lesson is not complicated. Patterns need to be recognized before they become headlines. Sexual assault allegations should be treated as safety issues, not reputation problems. DNA evidence should have every lawful chance to connect violent offenders before another woman is harmed. And being well-liked should never be confused with being safe. Jesse Matthew was not invisible. He was not some unknown figure who appeared out of nowhere. He had gone to schools, played sports, worked jobs, interacted with people. He had been accused before, he had been investigated, and he had been arrested. The warning signs were not all hidden. They were scattered, and nobody connected them in time. That is the tragedy beyond the tragedy. When I look at this case, I don't see just one man who committed terrible crimes. I see a system that kept treating each incident like it belonged in a separate folder. Liberty had its folder, Christopher Newport had its folder, Fairfax, Charlottesville had its folder, Morgan's family had their folder, Hannah's family had theirs. But predators don't live in folders. They move. They transfer schools, they change jobs, they cross county lines, they go from campuses to bars, cabs, neighborhoods, and if the systems do not talk to each other, the pattern gets to keep walking. Before we close out, I want to touch on two current stories that have been in headlines that I've seen. The first is the death of Natal Campbell, the mother of NFL player Kalis Campbell. According to reports, police were called to a home in Atlanta's Buckhead area on June 30th, 2026. After family members requested a welfare check, they were concerned because they could not reach Natal, and there were signs that something was wrong. When officers arrived, they found Natal Campbell unresponsive inside the home. She was 71 years old. Police say her son, Sierra Campbell, Callis Campbell's older brother, was inside the home and had barricaded himself before officers detained him. He has since been charged with murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a knife during the commission of a felony. And I want to be clear, this still is an active case. Sierra has been charged, not convicted, but the details that have come out are very disturbing. Reports say police had been called to the home multiple times in the months before Natal's death, including calls involving possible mental health concerns. Family members reportedly told dispatchers Sierra had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and another mental health issue. And this is one of those stories where you can feel the fear before the tragedy. The family was worried. They called for help. They were trying to get someone to check on her. And by the time police got inside, Natal was gone. The Campbell family released a statement saying they were devastated and asking for privacy as they grieve. The story opens up a hard conversation about families dealing with serious mental health crises inside the home. That does not excuse violence and it does not remove accountability, but it does raise the question of what families are supposed to do when they're scared. They know that someone is unstable and the system keeps responding after things escalate instead of before. The second story is about Janiah Walker, a Milwaukee teen who disappeared when she was 15 years old. Janiah went missing on June 23rd, 2022. Her mother said she last saw her lying in bed before leaving for work. They talked several times throughout the day, and then Janiah suddenly stopped responding. She was supposed to meet her father that day to apply for a summer work permit, but she never showed up. A nearby Ring camera later captured her leaving her apartment complex with a large green backpack. Her mother believed Janiah may have been lured away, possibly by someone she met online, and for years her family lived with the uncertainty that families of missing people know too well. But in a rare update, police confirmed Janiah was found safe on May 25th, 2026. She's now 19. Authorities have not released many details about where she was found, who she may have been with, or what happened during the years she was missing. Her family has asked for privacy. Janiah's case also became part of a larger conversation in Wisconsin around missing Black women and girls. She was one of the faces connected to a push for a missing and murdered African American women and girls task force. And that's why this update is important, because when a young Black girl goes missing, her story should not have to fight for attention, but it often does. Her family should not have to beg for urgency, and when she's found alive, that should be treated as major news too. So as we close, these two stories sit on opposite ends of the same fear. In one, a family called for help and still lost someone. In another, a family held on to hope for years and finally got the update so many families never receive. Both stories come back to the same point. When families raise concerns, the response needs to match the urgency. That's all I have for today's episode. If you made it this far, thank you for sitting with these stories with me. I really appreciate the support, the comments, the shares, and the way y'all continue to show up for us here on Murder in the Black. Also, for those of you who are like me and love to binge a story all the way through, no interruptions. Episodes 6, 7, and 8 of What I Didn't See will be dropping Sunday on the paid subscription. I also will be releasing bonus journal entries with behind-the-scene insight into Christina's thoughts, so you'll get a little deeper into where her mind was during the entire story. Let me know your thoughts on today's episodes, especially around the missed opportunities in this case. What do you guys think? Always like, subscribe, share with somebody who follows true crime with care, and I'll see you next week. Until next time, this is Murder in the Black.